when I first started going to the Vauxhall, it was at a time when most drag acts were lip syncing with patter in between numbers. They lip synced to basically show tunes and bassy and the obvious stuff. It was fantastic. And some of them were really, really good at it, and they'd bring such comedy to that lip syncing. And then the patter in between was, you know, observations from the life of a drag queen. Much of it was quite misogynistic, although actually I think people have kind of overplayed how misogynistic drag was. I think it's become a kind of bit of a cliche to say they were all misogynistic. I mean, they used to make jokes about women, but they also used to make jokes about men. So I think they dished it out pretty evenly. But I do remember there was the Harlequins were a very memorable act. They were two rather large queens who used to squeeze themselves into these fantastic sparkly frocks, and they had the full wigage and, you know, really just full on drag queen stuff. And they just did show tune after show tune, but they were very funny and they were just disgusting humour, but it was quite good. There was the Disappointer sisters. I think they were still going. I never saw Mrs. Shufflewick, much to my chagrin. Oh God, who were the other ones? There were quite a lot of those acts going around at the time, like double acts, that sort of thing. But where it all started for me, really, in loving the Vox as a cabaret venue, was with Dave Dale, who was really the preeminent star of the scene in the early to mid 80s. He was an incredibly talented drag performer and still is. He did it was lip syncing, and but he was very, very good at it, and he did all this mugging while he was doing it. It was just brilliant. Split second timing, quick changes like you've never seen, just really, really funny. And he used to put on, you know, original shows, like sort of panto type stuff. I think he did those more at the Union Tavern. But there was one night I was at the Vox, and it must have been by this time about 85, and I saw Dave Dale with another queen on stage with him who was called Paul Savage, skinny Scouse queen, who was just hilarious. And of course that was Lily Savage, and within a few weeks or months of that she'd started performing as Lily Savage. So I remember when Lily was first out with the big hair and everything, I remember saying, oh, that's that queen that we saw with Dave Dale that night. And he was very, very funny. And he very quickly kind of leapfrogged Dave and became the biggest star that the scene has ever produced. I mean, you know, even without his subsequent television career as Paul O'Grady, he was the biggest star of the lot, and rightly so, because he was by far the funniest comedian I have ever seen, in drag or out of it, on a good night. I mean, he would be flying high. And I think Paul's written and spoken about this, but, you know, he liked to drink and whatever else, and you know, he just used to go absolutely berserk. It was fantastic. So that was, yeah, I mean, Paul, Lily Savage, and then he did his amateur nights. I think they were on a Thursday, amateur nights at the Vox, can you imagine? And so there were all these extraordinary, eccentric characters that used to come week after week to do the amateur nights. But of course, the one that everybody remembers was Rosemarie. Oh God, Rosemarie. I mean, has anyone else talked about her? Rosemarie was this strange little creature, God bless her heart. She was really short, and I think she'd had polio or something, but she was very wonky, you know. She had really twisty limbs and this funny little skew-if face. He was very odd looking, and he had a bit of a speech impediment, but he used to drag up in this really ratty little wig, and the lips were all wrong and all over the mouth, and the eyeliner just like this. And these ratty old drag that God knows where he'd got it from. But he just did it with absolute conviction. I mean, it was heartbreaking, because when he was up there, he was a star. And at first, people just used to cheer and laugh because they just thought it was so funny. But as it went on, he got this following, and people started to realise that in some way he was sort of playing out what we all wanted, which was to be something and to be taken seriously. And it wasn't a particularly nice time for gay people at this time. You know, AIDS was happening. There was Section 28 was happening. There was a lot of shit happening, basically. And he was up there, this sort of mad conviction, and he used to say, I want to be Bobby's girl. Oh, God. And then, of course, he was murdered. So he picked up some trade at, I think it was at a bar in North London called Traffic. It was near where he lived in King's Cross. And he picked up this piece of psychotic trade who murdered him back at his flat. And they had a sort of wake for him at the Vauxhall. I think it was at the Vauxhall. And they just had a single red rose on stage with a spotlight on it, and they played Bobby's Girl. I mean, it still makes me want to cry thinking about it, but everybody was in floods of tears because he was so loved, you know. Adrella was a big star down there. They used to do the Sunday afternoon sessions. Regina Fong, I mean, I think of him more as a kind of black cap person, but he used to do a regular gig at the Vauxhall, everybody doing the typewriter thing. And, you know, that great wave of 80s drag, it was so big at that time, you know, and there were some of the old school ones like the Trollettes, and Phil Starr was still on the circuit, Lee Paris, all these fabulous old queens. Even some of the really old post-war ones would get wheeled out sometimes. But then it all started to die down. I think that Savage went on to greatness. The other ones didn't particularly. And the Vauxhall became a bit of a spent force for a while, and I think it very nearly closed on many, many occasions. There were so many times when we were thinking, my God, they can't keep going, because they were only opening once a week. I think Ducky was the only thing that kept it going, to be honest. You know, Ducky started in, mid-90s, and, you know, I think at one time Ducky was pretty much all that was happening there, and they were hanging on by a thread. And there were all these discussions about knocking it down. The property developers would have given their eye teeth to get hold of that plot. I can't believe it's still standing, really. I mean, it's a miracle. And so it went through a very fallow period, and we all fully expected it to go. But then suddenly, you know, Ducky started to bring in other things, and people realised it was a very viable venue, and it reinvented itself as a cabaret venue. And, you know, the rest is history. It's open every night of the week now, as far as I'm aware. So they had the Sunday afternoon sessions became big. They started coming in on other nights. And, you know, lo and behold, it's now one of the most popular venues on the London scene.